Master Zalo and the 6 Jedi Knights near Malgus leapt back and up, flipping at the top of the arc of their leaps, and landed in a crouch 20 meters away. "May the Force be with you all!" Zalo shouted to his fellow Jedi, and lit his blade. Dozens more Jedi poured out of the hallway behind him and flowed down the staircase, the blades of their lightsabers visible through the smoke and dust, a forest of green and blue aura flames. The Jedi did not shout as they charged, but the rumble of their boots and sandals on the floor sounded like rolling thunder.
"Stay near me,"
Malgus said over his shoulder to Alina. "Yes," she said, her blasters already in hand. Malgus' Sith charged out of the carcass of the dropship, their collective roar the sound of a hungry, rage-filled beast. The red lines of their blades cut the dust-covered air. Lord Adras, a political favorite of Darth Angral and constant irritant to Malgus, led them. Like all of the Sith warriors save Malgus, a dark mask obscured his face entirely. Malgus used his distaste for Adras to further feed his anger. He had requested that Darth Angral allow him to lead the attack alone, but Angral had insisted that Adras lead the dropship team. Discarding his cloak, discarding the remaining restraints on his rage, Malgus joined the Sith charge, taking position before Adras. Emotion fed his power, and its swell fairly lifted him from his feet. He felt the power of the dark side around him, within him. Blaster bolts crisscrossed the battlefield from left and right as 2 platoons of Republic soldiers emerged from somewhere above and to the side and fired into the Sith ranks. Malgus nested deeply in the Force, perceived the dozens of bolts and the trajectory with perfect clarity. Without breaking stride, he whipped his blade left, right, angled at 10 degrees, and turned 3 bolts back on the soldiers who fired them, killing all 3. A soldier had exploded a grenade in his face in the Battle of Alderaan, so he enjoyed killing soldiers when he could. Behind him, Alina's twin blasters answered to the left and right with bolts of their own, picking off 2 more soldiers. The Sith and Jedi forces closed, Sith battlelust facing the calm of the Jedi. The floor of the temple, the arena where centuries of indeterminate strife would at last reach a conclusion. Those strong in the Force would survive, and their understanding of the Force would evolve. Those weak in the Force would die. Malgus sought Master Zalo, but could not make him out from the crowd of faces, dust, flames, and glowing blades. So he chose a Jedi at random from the crowd, a human male with a blue blade and a short beard, and targeted him. Waves of power distorted the air and Dopplered sound as the Jedi and Sith forces crashed into one another and intermixed in a chaotic roaring tangle of bodies, lightsabers, and shouts. Malgus augmented his strength with the Force, took a 2-handed grip on his blade, and unleashed an overhand slash designed to split the Jedi in half. The Jedi sidestepped the blow and crosscut with his blue blade at Malgus' throat. Malgus got his blade up in time, parried, and slammed a kick into the Jedi's midsection. The blow folded the Jedi in half, sent him reeling backward 5 paces. Malgus leapt into the air, flipped, landed behind him, and drove his blade through the Jedi. Roaring with battle lust, Malgus sought another opponent. A flash of lavender skin drew his gaze. Alina. She ducked under a saber slash and dived to her side, firing half a dozen blaster shots as she did so. The Padawan who tried to kill her, a female Zabrak, the horns of her head gilt with colored pigments, deflected the shots as she closed in for another blow. Alina flipped to her feet, still firing, but the Padawan deflected every shot and drew nearer. Malgus drew on the Force, and with a blast of power drove the Padawan across the hall and into one of the towering columns of stone, where she collapsed, blood leaking from her nose. Alina continued firing, her eyes darting here and there over the battlefield as she sought targets. The battle turned ever more chaotic. Jedi and Sith leapt, bounded, rolled, and flipped as red lines intersected with those of blue and green. Blasts of power sent bodies flying through the air, against walls, pulled loose rocks from the ceiling, and sent them crashing into flesh. The hall was a cacophony of sound, shouts, screams, the hum of lightsabers, the intermittent sound of weapons fire. Malgus walked in its midst, reveled in it. He watched Lord Adras leap into the middle of the squad of Republic soldiers and punctuate his landing with an explosion of force energy that cast the soldiers away like dry leaves. Malgus, not to be outdone, picked a Jedi Knight at random, a human female 10 meters away, held forth his left hand, and discharged veins of blue lightning from his fingertips. The jagged lines of energy cut a swath through the battle, harvesting 2 Padawans as they went, until they caught up to the Jedi Knight and lifted her off her feet. She screamed as the lightning ripped into her, her flesh made temporarily translucent from the dark power coursing through her. Malgus savored her pain as she died. He caught Adras eyeing him and gave him a mocking salute with his lightsaber. The high-pitched sound of Alina's blasters drew his attention. She bounded past him and over the slain female Jedi Knight's corpse, a lavender blur firing rapidly. Putting her back to a column, she crouched and sought targets for her blasters. She met his eyes, winked, and signaled behind him. He whirled to see a score of more Republic soldiers rushing into the hall from a side room, blaster rifles tracing hot lines through the battlefield. Alina answered with shots of her own. Before Malgus could dispatch the soldiers, the Mandalorian rose from somewhere behind them, her jetpack spitting fire, her head-to-toe silver and orange armor gleaming in the fire of the hall. Hovering in the air like an avenging spirit, she discharged 2 small missiles from wrist mounts. They struck the floor near the Republic soldiers and blossomed into flame. Bodies, shouts, and loose rock flew in all directions. Still hovering, she spun a circle in the air, while flamethrowers mounted on her forearm engulfed another group of soldiers. Malgus knew the battle had turned, that it soon would be over. He glanced around, still seeking Zalo, the only opponent in the field worthy of his attention. Before he could locate the Jedi Master, 3 more Jedi swarmed him. He parried the chop of a human male, leapt over the low slash of an orange-skinned Togruta female, severed the hand of the 3rd, a female human, disarming her, then grabbed her by the throat with his free hand and slammed her into the floor with his force-enhanced strength. "Alora!" said the human male. Leaping high over the male's cross-slash, Malgus landed behind the Togruta, who parried his lightsaber strike, but could not defend herself against a force blast that sent her skidding across the hall and into a pile of rubble. Malgus roared, the lust for battle so pronounced that he would have killed his own warriors were there no Jedi left to slay. He wanted, needed to kill another, and to do so with his hands. He ducked under a slash from the male, lunged forward, and took the Jedi by the throat. He lifted him from his feet and held him suspended in the air, gagging. The Jedi's brown eyes showed no fear, but did show pain. Malgus roared, squeezed hard, then dropped the body and stood over it, blade at his side, breath coming hard. The battle still swirled around him, and he stood in its center, the eye of the Sith storm. Malgus finally spotted Master Zalo, 10 paces away, whirling, spinning, his green blade a blur of precision and speed. One Sith warrior fell to him, another. Lord Adras landed before him, trying to take Malgus's kill for himself. Adras ducked low and slashed at Zalo's knees. Zalo leapt over the blow and unleashed a blast of energy that sent Adras skidding on his backside across the hall.
He is mine!
Malgus shouted, charging through the battlefield. He repeated himself as he passed Adras.
Zalo is mine!
Zalo must have heard Malgus, for he turned, met his eyes. Alina, too, must have heard Malgus' shouting. She emerged from behind the column, deduced Malgus' intent, and fired several shots at Zalo. Zalo, his eyes on Malgus throughout, deflected the bolts with his blade and sent them back at Alina. 2 struck her, and as she collapsed, Zalo used a force blast to drive her body against a column. Malgus halted in mid-stride, his rage temporarily abated. He turned and stared at Alina's fallen form for a long moment. Her lavender body crumpled on the floor, her eyes closed, 2 black circles marring the smooth purple field of her flesh. She looked like a wilted flower. Anger refilled him, overcame him. A shout of hate, raw and jagged, burst from his throat. power went with it, shattering a nearby column and sending a rain of stone shards through the room. He returned his gaze to Zalo and stalked toward him, his rage and power surging before him in a palpable wave. Another Jedi stepped in front of him, blue blade held high. Malgus barely saw him. He simply extended a hand, pushed through the Jedi's insufficient defenses, seized his throat with the Force, and choked him to death. Tossing the body aside, he moved toward Zalo. Zalo, for his part, moved toward Malgus. A Sith warrior bounded at Zalo from his left, but Zalo leapt over the Sith's blade, spun, slashed, and cut down the Sith. Zalo and Malgus closed. They halted at 1 meter, studied each other for a moment. A human male Jedi Knight separated from the swirl of battle and stabbed at Malgus. Malgus sidestepped the blue line of the blade, punched the man in the stomach, doubling him over, and raised his own blade for a killing blow. Zalo bounded forward and intercepted the downstroke. Zalo and Malgus stared into each other's faces, and the rest of the battle fell away. There was only Malgus and his rage, and Zalo and his calm.